With about half a day's march ahead of the Union Army of the Potomac, General Lee planned to gamble. Embarking a portion of the 1st Corps into commissioned train carriages, he sends the Corps north, hoping to cross the rest of the army at the Rappahannock Station while flanking the Federal Army. Meanwhile, the Army of the Potomac chases with what little intelligence they have and hope to catch the Army of Northern Virginia before it can cross. By the afternoon of June 4th, the Army of the Potomac have found themselves increasingly stretched out, searching for Lee and his army. Unwilling to let go of his gamble, Lee sends the rest of the 1st Corps northwards. Little did he know, he'd be intercepted by Federal cavalry on an accident in the evening of June 4th. The 6th Corps marches to the sound of the guns, and on the 5th a protracted skirmish occurs across the Marsh Run between Morgansburg and Bealeton Station. Hoping to catch the suspected Confederate column along the Rappahannock, the Union Cavalry Corps converges 2 of its 3 columns to Rappahannock Station. Without sight of the rest of the Army of Northern Virginia, the Army of the Potomac begins to combine, hoping to strike an early blow to the isolated 1st Corps. Deciding to avoid a forced crossing, the 2nd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia swings to the north, attempting to flank the Federal cavalry now guarding the Rappahannock Bridge. Although half successful, the 1st Corps turns around and slams into the Confederate Corps. Over the next few hours, the 3rd and 2nd Corps would switch places. Meanwhile, the Confederate 1st Corps, under heavy pressure, falls back to Fayetteville. With the 2nd Corps still marching to the battlefield, and worried a Confederate Corps may have slipped past them to the north, the 5th and 6th Corps hold their ground. Out of position and running out of supplies, the Confederate 1st Corps elects to fall back in a night march on the 6th. Later in the morning, the 3rd Corps force marches northwards, hoping to re-establish contact with the 1st Corps. Back along the Rappahannock, the Federal 1st and 2nd Corps move to engage what they still believe to be a significant Confederate force. Just as the Confederate 1st Corps did the day earlier, the 2nd Corps decides to night march back to Culpeper. At the same time, the Federal 1st Corps night marches around the flank, hoping to cut off the 1st Corps that they still believe to be isolated. As the morning begins, the 6th Corps with cavalry support probe the Confederate lines at Foxville. By the evening, the opposing 2nd Corps find themselves in a boxing match outside Culpeper, both sides causing terrible casualties. Meanwhile, the Confederate cavalry begin a daring short raid around the Federal rear, looking to exploit an open rear or flank. Alerted to the cavalry in their rear, the 1st Corps of the Army of the Potomac jumps into train carts and rides to Bealeton Station as the Federal cavalry begins to merge. Down at Culpeper, both 2nd Corps have decided to cease the fight and hold off, eventually marching away from each other in the afternoon. Over at Foxville, as the Confederate cavalry continues to ride around the Federal rear, the 6th and 5th Corps attempt a major assault against the 3rd Corps, ultimately being repulsed at major loss. Both sides take half a day's rest in their current positions. Again, at the afternoon, the 5th and 6th Corps probe Confederate lines as the cavalry finalize the chase and hold their ground at a crossing to the north. Further south, both 2nd Corps march northwards back to friendly lines, and the Federal 1st Corps returns to Bealeton Station, hoping to once more flank the Confederates through Warrenton before they can escape. On the 11th of June, the Confederate 2nd Corps conducts another night march to reach the far end of the line, preparing to strike the Federal right once rested. On the left, as the Federal 2nd Corps approaches, both the 2nd and 6th Corps drive forward against the 1st Corps, while the 5th and 3rd Corps pin each other in the forests around White Sulphur Springs. All the engagements across the battlefield are extremely bloody, but as the afternoon turns to evening, the Federal 1st Corps force marches around the Confederate flank. With all his corps exhausted, depleted, or almost destroyed, General Lee decides under the cover of darkness to evacuate the Army of Northern Virginia through Oak Shade and its nearby ford before being destroyed.